Hello, everybody. I am Drew Duncan. Do not forget that Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram is all at Drew Duncan Radio. Don't forget you can find me on YouTube and Patreon by looking for Drew Duncan Radio. And also, I am wherever you are listening to podcasts. Simply take a device to play Drew Duncan on iHeart, Spreaker, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Deezer, CastBox. I am wherever you are listening to podcasts. I had a really good opportunity to call the New Orleans Pelicans Chicago Bulls game last night. And, you know, I know the hype train around Zion is phenomenal, right? And one of the things that I've talked about at semi-nauseum is the fact that no matter what this kid does, he's never going to be able to live up to the expectations that we in the media have created for this kid. In a lot of ways, I feel sorry for him. Now, for the most part, I think he's been able to handle it exceptionally well. But that doesn't stop, though, the hype train that is around Zion. And when I was watching that game last night, you know, the first quarter, first of all, I was surprised that Zion even got the start, right? Because there was supposedly the toe thing, and then everybody said he's fine. And, of course, I'm sure Pels fans were freaking out. But I think after what they saw last night, everything is going to be okay. The thing that I talked about before the game was Chicago really needed to create spacing in order to win. With all the injuries and everything that was going on, they were going to have to find a way offensively to create spacing. And defensively, I thought they were going to have to scheme a little bit differently. I really thought some zone plays would have worked. And initially, they were doing those things. They were dominating that basketball game for about the first 6.5 minutes. And then for whatever reason, they got away from it. And I talked about Brandon Ingram being the true star of this basketball team heading into that game. And though the points numbers don't necessarily show what he did, the way that they do for Zion, which was really after the run that was made by the Pelicans that ultimately gave them the lead, most of what he did was in the second half of that basketball game when the game was already in doubt, or, you know, not in doubt, which, by the way, a hell of a 1.5 minute comeback or so there by Chicago at the end of that one. But when I was watching Zion, I just thought to myself, okay, there's a few things that this kid really needs to improve on. And understand that I'm hoping the best for this kid's career. I really am. And I also understand that I'm not a hater, dude. I never have been. I never will be. That's not my style. That's not my thing. That's not my game. And I did say that it would, you know, take 3 or 4 years for him to really begin to develop. I know in the NBA, the transition should be shorter to a lot of people because there's more games to be played than there are in football. But I still think for any professional athlete, it takes you 3 to 4 years at the minimum to really learn how to play your position. And so for Zion, a couple of things that I saw, number one was turnovers. You know, Zion, there were a lot of times when he would have the ball on post-up play that they were really trying to integrate with him. And he would just try to go in on 3 defenders, and it caused a lot of turnovers, especially early on in the game. And the Chicago Bulls, that's how they were really able to assert themselves early on, because offensively, Zion was doing a little too much, and they were kind of trying like a double post play move there with between Ingram and Zion. They were trying to implement that into the game, and it really wasn't working out very well. And so Zion's going to have to learn to not take it into 3 defenders so frequently, and he's going to have to really learn how to control his handles. You know, they listed officially 5 turnovers from Zion alone, but I really saw about 7 or 8. I don't know why they listed 5 by my count. It was a little bit different. Regardless, the point is he was responsible for a quarter of the turnovers from the Pelicans in that game that night, or last night, I should say. The other thing that I saw from Zion was conditioning. And again, the NBA level is completely different than college basketball because your conditioning rate has to be different. Now, I will be fair. Zion missed, 40 games of this season? So a lot of that was spent resting, recuperating, coming back from the injury. Then, of course, up until last night, we really hadn't seen him get a lot of playing time. You know, they were really game managing him, so to speak. And, you know, he would be in at spurts and then he would come back out. So, of course, with that minimalistic gameplay, it's going to be difficult to make that transition. The injury, a little bit of a hindrance for Zion. I'll concede to that. but still he's going to have to work on his conditioning. There were plenty of times when I saw Zion not being able to get up the floor with his guys. He was huffing and puffing and slow walking a lot. So the other thing that I definitely see from Zion in terms of improvement is going to have to be conditioning. Now, in terms of the overall game last night, look, what I said and what I saw was the New Orleans team that should be. With the amount of talent that this basketball team has, they shouldn't be struggling to win games the way that they are, to be perfectly honest with you. I think Lonzo Ball's a severely underrated basketball player, especially as a passer. I like this bench. I like this team as a whole. I mean, come on, you've got Brandon Ingram, Zion, J.J. Redick, Lonzo Ball. You've got Hayes. There's no shortage of talent on this basketball team. You've got Favor. I don't understand why this team isn't as good as they should be. Maybe I haven't watched enough. I know I didn't like the way they finished that game last night. That's for damn sure. And I got to tell you, if Chicago would have fouled with about 30 seconds left to go in that game, we may have been looking at a completely different basketball game. I mean, you had Zach LaVine going absolutely bananas for what those guys were doing. And I got to tell you, there is a kid by the name of Adam Bakoka, who is French, came in averaging 2.5 per game, ends up going 6 for 6 at the end of that basketball game, including 3 for 3. I saw a report, I think it was from SB Nation, where they called it a fake rally. There was nothing fake about that rally. That was a combination of lazy basketball from New Orleans, who at one point had, a 27, 29-point advantage in that basketball game, and they almost blew that thing at the end. I mean, maybe that's why they're not as good. Starting games, not so great. Finishing games with big leads where you should easily dominate. There should never be a question as to whether or not the game is in doubt. And that was the best that they were able to come up with. Maybe that's what's going on with New Orleans. This basketball team is 4-4 since Zion has been back. I'm not going to say that he hasn't been a big difference maker in this team. Even Lonzo Ball said that in order to win games, we are going to have to get the hands in the ball of Zion. But again, the rally was really while Zion was on the pine. Other guys were stepping up in that basketball game. And I'm not saying that Zion didn't play good, but if you watch the game, then you would know he really didn't play great, which is okay. But this New Orleans team should be far and away a lot better than they really are. Regardless of that, those are the things that I see where Zion can improve: conditioning, trying not so much to take too much control, play a little bit of hero ball, going inside when you got 3 guys on top of you, kick that thing out. Turnovers were definitely a problem. I mean, we're talking ball handling skills from top of the key and other places on the floor. So those are the things where I see Zion needing to improve as far as New Orleans goes. If this is any indication of what this team is going to look like going forward, maybe next year. But regardless of that, I think the upshot for this kid is beyond amazing. Guys, I am Drew Duncan. Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram is all at Drew Duncan Radio. You can find me on YouTube and Patreon by looking for Drew Duncan. And do not forget that I am wherever you are listening to podcasts. Simply tell your device to play Drew Duncan on iHeartRadio, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spreaker, Deezer, CastBox, Podcast Addict. I am wherever you are listening to podcasts. And as always, don't you dare touch that dial.